Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel weighs in on Donald Trump's State of the Union address. But first, pushing immigration to the forefront.
Temporary individuals should be treated as that, temporary, and tourists. What we're concerned about is the number of low-skill temporary foreign workers, international students, and asylum seekers who may not be here on a permanent basis and able to be long-term permanent taxpayers.
In her recent provincial address, the Premier introduced 9 questions for an October 19th referendum, 5 of which center on immigration, including access to provincially funded services like health and education, and whether Alberta should take more control over immigration levels. Joining us now, Raj Sharma, an immigration lawyer in Calgary. Raj, good to see you, sir. Welcome back.
My pleasure, Michael. Good to see you.
All right. What do you see this referendum accomplishing where immigration is concerned?
It's a good question, Michael. I'm not sure what it's designed to accomplish. The referenda, shall we say, is perhaps more about politics than it is about policy. And some are seeing it as a distraction from the anticipated significant deficit that's going to be announced tomorrow. And some see it as scapegoating newcomers for the sins of past policymakers.
The Premier points a finger of blame at the previous Trudeau government, saying post-COVID, things went completely off the rails. How does federal immigration policy then or now factor into this conversation?
I think the Premier's criticism on this point has a solid foundation, shall we say. I share some of the concerns. A lot of individuals and policy experts share the concerns, we can call the Trudeau government's grasp or a thumbless grasp on immigration policy, particularly the last few years, and particularly with respect to temporary residents. We simply didn't shut the taps off fast enough. We simply didn't pivot fast enough. And so what we saw in the last couple of years was an inordinate amount of temporary residents entering Canada to this extent that we have almost 7% of the population of Canada being temporary residents. We're trying to move that down a little bit. We're trying to shift that down. So the Premier's concerns about the massive increase in the number of temporary residents, particularly international students, in the wake of COVID, it does have some basis. In fact, bear in mind, of course, this has to be contrasted, or the context, I suppose, has to be that Premier Smith called for, in the last couple of years, called for the population of Alberta to increase to 10 million by 2050, for Red Deer to be a city of 1 million, something that she mused about. And of course that there was 2 letters to the aforementioned Justin Trudeau by Daniel Smith calling for greater provincial nominee numbers, 20,000 to 30,000. So it is in stark contrast, shall we say, with what she's called for in not too distant of a past.
Okay, so then how much does immigration contribute to the pressures Alberta is facing on challenging fronts like health, education, social services?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I'll note that the Premier herself was not able to quantify the cost, i.e. what would be the savings if we were to reduce temporary residents. And what I will say is that let's break down the number of temporary residents that access services in Alberta. You have asylum seekers, for example. So that's one bracket. Out of that bracket, the asylum seekers, their funding or their federal health expenditure is covered by the interim federal health plan. So that cost is borne by the federal government. That being said, of course, that they are going to occupy space, they are going to put a strain necessarily on services. The second bracket that you have is international students and temporary foreign workers. Now, temporary foreign workers all have jobs. They're paying taxes just like Canadian citizens and Canadian permanent residents, just like you and me. So they obviously contribute and they pay taxes, and the issue of fairness is that they're paying for something, and apparently the Premier doesn't want them to access those same services. So this is the sort of the nub of the issue, which is that A, we can't quite quantify it, and of course B is that they actually contribute, and C is that the net flows are actually decreasing over time as well. And again, it is odd to put the blame on a strain on services when we have not built a hospital in Edmonton, for example, since 1988.
Okay, even before a referendum is held, the government is preparing to introduce legislation in the sitting now underway to give the province greater control over immigration through regulating international recruiters, increasing oversight over those who recruit and hire foreign workers. How much of a lane does Alberta have here?
Immigration is primarily a federal jurisdiction, and where the province and the federal government sort of overlap, the federal government takes paramountcy. The Canada Health Act is again federal legislation, and so if Alberta wants to restrict eligibility, they're trying to put together a referendum, or they're trying to bring about they're going where their jurisdiction simply doesn't extend. They simply don't have the powers to amend the Canada Health Act. And again, the federal government does have some levers at play. For example, the funding that they do contribute towards provincial health coverage.
Okay, if post-referendum the government is able to act on some or all of the proposed changes, where do you see that leaving Alberta compared to other desirable provincial destinations?
It's hard to say, Michael. I mean, my father gives me these sort of aphorisms from his youth, and one of those aphorisms is that don't ask for directions to the village that you're not going to. I simply don't think we're going to get there. I don't think these referenda are going anywhere. I don't think that they're going to impact federal legislation. I don't think that they're going to lead to the village or the destination or the promised country that is being contemplated here. I see this as distraction, and I don't see this as legitimate policy. If you're looking at restricting health coverage, we want increased economic investments. We're trying to recruit, we're trying to get investment into Alberta. We're trying to, of course, support our tourism and hospitality sectors. That tourism and hospitality sectors in Jasper and Banff and Canmore, a lot of that is underpinned by temporary foreign workers, the IEC, the International Experience Class. Those are the working holiday individuals from countries like Ireland and Australia. And I'll note that just a month ago in January, the government attempted, without notice, to cut off healthcare eligibility and coverage to that group in particular. And at that time, I saw it as a trial balloon for changes down the pathway to the larger cohort of temporary foreign workers, and they quickly reversed that decision as well. So again, the temporary foreign workers that are now being scapegoated are the same individuals that are underpinning health services and hospitality and tourism, to name just a few.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for time. Appreciate your time this evening, Raj. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
Raj Sharma is an immigration lawyer in Calgary. From the government putting immigration on the referendum radar to pushing forward with provincial police and the U.S. President's State of the Union address. Time now for tonight's politics panel. And joining us this evening, Calgary-based public opinion consultant Janet Brown and Najib Jutt, political advisor and brand strategist. He's worked on election campaigns at every level of government here and abroad. So good evening to you both. And let's begin with the Alberta government's announcement of an October 19th referendum, details of which came with last week's provincial address by the Premier. We just heard from immigration lawyer Raj Sharma off the top on how immigration will factor into several of the questions that will be posed to Albertans. Janet, how much of this is about policy, and to what degree is this about politics? How nuanced a conversation is it?
Well, it's about politics in as much as these questions have come out of the Alberta Next panel. And when the Premier did her address last week, she had two things on her mind. One was getting out in front of tomorrow's budget, and the other was to close the loop on the Alberta Next panel. Now, they discussed a whole bunch of topics, ranging from an Alberta pension plan to a police force, which we'll talk more about. But one thing that really got the crowd animated was talk about immigration. So Danielle Smith has made this promise for more direct democracy, more citizens-initiated referendums, more government-initiated referendums, and it seemed like immigration was the one topic from the Alberta Next panel that she decided she would run with in a referendum.
Najib, where do you weigh in on the degree of say or control the Alberta government is seeking over immigration? Is there a reasonable policy conversation to be had here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reasonable, they cite Quebec as an example of having more control over immigration policy. I always say, if you want to know what Alberta Conservatives are going to do next, just look at what Trump is doing. He mentioned immigration and vilified immigrants and newcomers in his State of the Union address as well. It's the same kind of stuff that's happening here, more vilification, distraction, deflection from bad policy, another multi-billion-dollar deficit that's coming. Blaming immigrants and newcomers for putting extra pressure, which there's actually no evidence of that they do put extra pressure on public service because they actually contribute just as much as anyone else to the economy. But again, it's just another deflection, another distraction.
Janet, how much of the spotlight does a referendum involving immigration potentially steal away from a referendum question on separation if it is that one of those questions ends up on the ballot October 19th?
Well, I'm currently working under the assumption that the Alberta Prosperity Project does get enough signatures and that their question does qualify for the referendum, and that Danielle Smith puts either that question or one question on referendum on the one question about separation on this referendum. So yeah, so I think what this does is it complicates things a lot. Asking a question in isolation is one thing, but then when you ask a group of questions, as pollsters, we're always looking at how asking one question may influence how people vote subsequent questions. I think the Premier's strategy here, though, is give people the opportunity to say yes to more control over immigration, some of the constitutional changes that are in there. And I think her calculation is if you give people who are unsettled with federalism, people who are toying with separation, if you give them another way to exert themselves, they might be less likely to say yes to separation if that ends up on the ballot.
Najib, how do you see this shaping political dialogue, discourse over the next 8 months in the lead up to the referendum? Is it possible to talk about immigration without it getting overtly political?
No, it's not possible, and that's the intent of it. And even look at how these questions are formed. There's a question about, should the Alberta government have the ability to opt out of federal programs as long as they still get the funding? I mean, that's not going to happen. All of the questions, when you read them, they sound very reasonable, and most people are going to read them and say, yeah, this sounds reasonable, and this is what we should do. And that's how it's designed. It's designed to get yeses. Even though, the chances of it happening in the way that the questions are formulated is next to nil. There's a question on voting under the piece. There's a question on whether you're required to provide citizenship, evidence of citizenship to vote, which has nothing to do with immigration, right? I mean, this is, again, all designed to try to control voting, try to change and blame immigrants for what is bad monetary policy in terms of royalties, what is bad public policy in terms of healthcare and education, and which predates any of our immigration upticks that we've seen in the last few years. These policies, our boom and bust economy predates any immigration issues we've had.
All right, time for us to take a bit of a break, but when we come back, legislation to move the Sheriff's Service to provincial police. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. The spring sitting is now underway, and one of the Smith government's first pieces of legislation is Bill 15.
This bill creates a practical path for the eligible sheriffs to pursue police officer roles within the ASPS, and this is a major milestone in building the new service.
It's the latest legislative step in the creation of the Alberta Sheriff's Police Service, which was made a Crown corporation last year. The minister says the ASPS will work alongside municipal police and RCMP and not replace the Mounties, at least for now. Najib, surprised to see this bill being introduced at the start of the spring sitting? Is there symbolism in this coming before Thursday's budget?
No, I'm not surprised. I mean, again, this is a twofold strategy. One is, again, moving Alberta away from reliance on the federal government for anything, including policing, and also, again, setting up for the referendum on separation. This is all part and parcel of those same strategies. And it's also to me that there's always money for more policing and never money for the social services, actually reduce and homelessness and the other aspects of real societal ills. That there's always more money for policing.
Janet, what do you make of how the government is framing the need to move this whole process forward? Less now about replacing the RCMP and maybe more about working alongside police services, providing municipalities with options.
Well, as I said in the first segment, the idea of setting up an Alberta Provincial Police Force and cancelling contracts with the RCMP, it was something that was talked about in the Alberta Next panel. But there is some hesitation on making that move, even among the rural communities that are now served by the RCMP. So I think the government has realized that this is not a move that they could easily make where several rural and small town municipal governments are concerned. But I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to set themselves up so that we have a more credible policing at the provincial level. So, sheriffs don't have the same kind of training as regular police officers. That was one of the criticisms about cutting these contracts with the RCMP. So I think the government's trying to demonstrate that they're trying to bring a higher level of training to the police force. They're trying to bolster the numbers of provincial police officers that they can. And I think this is ultimately about demonstrating that there is a point in time at which Alberta can take control over policing and completely get rid of contracts with the RCMP.
All right, one more topic for us. That's U.S. President Donald Trump's marathon State of the Union address, which included the championing of widespread tariffs.
As time goes by, I believe the tariffs paid for by foreign countries will, like in the past, substantially replace the modern-day system of income tax, taking a great financial burden off the people that I love.
Trump spoke for an hour and 48 minutes, using the time to look back on the first year of his second term, highlighting his immigration crackdown, spending cuts, briefly also laying out his case for a possible attack on Iran. Now, Najib, longest ever State of the Union address. How would you frame motivation behind the messaging?
Longest ever, breaking his own record, and it's funny because it seemed tame, but it was tame compared to Trump. We're comparing him to him. It was just like the same old rhetoric that he's been pushing. That tariffs are going to be paid by other countries, which they're not. They're paid by American consumers. And again, measuring the economy and how everyday Americans are getting through a cost of living crisis by, the stock market. The stock market, just a shell game for wealthy people, is not a measure of how everyday people are doing. And he's trying to make these connections in terms of how great his economy is doing due to tariffs.
Janet, was there messaging that will last beyond the day? Something that will give Republicans a bump in the lead up to midterms?
Well, You know, if you came down from outer space and you watched that State of the Union, you would think that this was the most popular U.S. president ever and that it was the strongest U.S. economy ever. And of course, neither one of those things are true. The poll numbers look horrible for the president right now. Things are looking very, very bad going into the midterm. And so I think the purpose of the speech, and I think why we didn't see Trump go too far off track or get too bombastic, is because this was sort of an attempt to really push the narrative that the Trump government is doing well and hope that that sort of wins some soft voters over. I don't think he made any big gaffes. I think this was about redefining the message on the narrative that works for them and just hoping that they can turn things around before the midterms.
Najib, surprised how little Canada factored into the address. Barely any reference beyond the men's gold medal hockey game.
Yeah, it's purposeful as well. I think that, you know, he's probably a little bit taken aback by the measures that our Prime Minister has taken in trying to move our economy and reliance of trade on trade with the U.S. And probably, taking stock of that and figuring out what his response to that will be, especially, since, his only weapon, tariffs, has been struck down by his own Supreme Court. So, and also, too, people like Trump, they soon realize that, they don't want to get into any situation in which they seem to be losing or on the losing end. So I think that might have been the justification for not mentioning it as well. So maybe not wanting to add insult to injury after the hockey game.
Janet, what do you think? The rest of the world surely watching in on this. So what do you think the rest of the world takes away, Canada included?
Well, I think the rest of the world takes away that this is business as usual, that Trump is committed to tariffs, that he's committed to this narrative that foreign countries pay tariffs when in fact they're paid by U.S. importers and passed on to American consumers. So he is doubling down on this. He was a little more reserved last night than he normally is, but the fight on tariffs is real, and he intends to push it to the point that Americans somehow won't have to pay income tax. So I think the rest of the world, the message is gird your loins. Trump is going to be Trump. He's going to try and change. He's going to try and win the midterms by changing his messages, but he's not going to change his tactics.
All right, folks, we'll have to leave it there for time. Great to see you both. Thank you for this.
Thanks, Michael.
Ready, set. This is Aiden's favorite kind of afternoon, just being outside and playing. This kind and gentle boy finds joy in simple, calm moments.
3, 2, 1.
Born in 2015, Aiden loves playing with his favorite toys, riding his bike, or listening to music. He also loves sharing time with others.
Here they come.
At school, Aiden receives support for his learning needs. He's made great progress in expressing himself through pictures, gestures, and words.
What color is this?
Orange.
Yes.
He's also so proud that he can count up to 20 and write his name.
N. Aiden. Good job.
Aiden deserves a forever family, a loving, nurturing home to support him as he grows up.
For more information, go online to alberta.ca/Wednesdays-child.
Proudly supported by CTV.
Now, here are a few responses to a recent story posted by CTV News. It's about both separatist and anti-separatist groups expressing displeasure with the UCP government's planned referendum for October 19th. McPhee says Alberta just wants a fair shake. Quebec has been using separation as a tool to get what they want for decades. I don't see how this is any different. Excuse writes, when you try to play both sides, sometimes you end up playing yourself. Kerry says, let's have an election. Smith and her cabinet need to go. And Michelle thinks, in this economy, with all the political upheaval caused by Trump, I would hope that Alberta stands with Canada. Have your say. Email us anytime at comments@albertaprimetime.com. Coming up tomorrow, as the Smith government presses forward with plans to transition sheriffs into provincial police, we'll get reaction from the group representing RCMP officers. That's on Thursday. Until then, have a great evening, everyone, from all of us at Alberta Primetime. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time.